Good day everyone, we are your reporters for today, but before we proceed to the discussion, let me introduce myself first and my group members. I am Jawari and my group members are Sonido, Banton, Sofia, Maria Leones Jimenez, and Mariel Quirante. And our topic is all about storytelling.
Good day everyone, let's start. Our topic is all about storytelling. So what is storytelling? A statement by the National Storytelling Network defines storytelling as an ancient art form and a valuable form of human expression. Because story is essential to many art forms, however, the word storytelling is often used in many ways. So storytelling originated with visual stories such as cave drawings and then shifted to oral traditions in which stories were passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. So here is what most of us mean by storytelling. Storytelling is the interactive art of using words and actions while encouraging the listener's imaginations. It is a cultural activity of sharing stories, sometimes with improvisation or theatrics. A storytelling can be simply reading a story to someone, performing it, or even telling a friend about something. So the crucial element of stories and storytelling includes the plot, the character, and the narrative point of view.
So here are the most of us mean by storytelling. First is storytelling is interactive. Storytelling can be interactive in different ways. So storytelling involves two-way interaction between a storyteller and one or more listener. It is expected in storytelling that there are one or more listeners. The responses of the listeners influence the telling of the story. Their reaction can influence the storytelling of the storyteller. In fact, storytelling emerges from the interaction and coordinated efforts of teller and the audience. Next is, in particular, storytelling does not create an imaginary barrier between the speaker and the listeners. So in storytelling it will not create an imaginary barrier to the listener and to the storyteller. This is part of what distinguishes storytelling from the forms of theater that uses imaginary fourth wall. The interactive nature of storytelling partially accounts for its immediacy and impact. So the impact is very important in order to have an interactive storytelling. And its best storytelling can directly and tightly connect the teller and the audience. So, in the purest sense, you can make your stories interactive by delivering them in an engaging way, using facial expressions, gestures, and tones, and moving about, in order to keep your audience interacting with you, so that they will not get bored of your storytelling. Watch their faces, their body language, and eye contacts, because they are telling you that you are involved or not in the story. And it is very important in order to give a interactive storytelling. Second is storytelling uses words. We all know that in storytelling, it is telling a story that we use words from the piece. Storytelling uses language. The language that which you are prefer, whether it is the spoken language or a manual language such as American Sign Language. So the language here is the major language that you use in telling the story. For example, English, like that. The use of language distinguishes storytelling from most forms of dance and mime. So it is very important to use language in storytelling, because without language, we can't tell a story. Number 3 that we mostly mean by or about storytelling is storytelling uses actions such as vocalizations, physical movement, or gestures. These actions are the parts of spoken or manual language, other than words. In storytelling, it is very important to use gestures, hand movements, body movements, so that you can, in order for you to deliver effectively the storytelling. The use distinguishes storytelling from writing and text-based computer interaction. Not all verbal language behaviors need to be present in storytelling. So, it is not very important to use non-verbal language behaviors when you are telling a story. Some storytellers use body movement like gestures, body movement, so that I feel that they are engaged in the storytelling. Some storyteller uses body movement extensively, for example, whereas others use little or none. Fourth is storytelling present a story. So, storytelling present a story. These actions are the parts of spoken or manual language. Other than words, they use distinguishes storytelling from writing and text-based computer interactions. Not all non-verbal language behavior need to be present in storytelling. Some storytellers use body movement extensively, for example, whereas others uses little or more. Art or storytelling present a story is an art forms such as poetry, recitation, and stand-up comedy sometimes present stories and sometimes don't. Since they generally involve the other four components, they can be regarded as a forms of storytelling whenever they also present stories. So, storytelling always involves the presentation of a story or a narrative. Many other art forms also present story, but storytelling presents it with the other four components. Every culture has its own definition of story. What is recognized as a story is one situation may not be accepted as one in another. Some situations call for spontaneity and playful digression. For example, others call for near exact repetition of a revered text. Art forms such as poetry, recitation, and stand-up comedy sometimes present stories and sometimes don't. Since they generally involve the other four components, they can be regarded as forms of storytelling whenever they also present a story.
So the fifth one is storytelling encourages the active imagination of the listeners. So in storytelling, the listener imagines the story. In most traditional theater or in a typical dramatic film. On the other hand, the listener enjoys the illusion that the listener is actually witnessing the character or events described in the story. So the storytelling listener's role is to actively create the vivid, multi-sensory images, actions, characters, and events, the reality of the story in his or her mind, based on the performance by the teller and on the listener's own past experiences, beliefs, and understandings. So the completed story happens in the mind of the listener, a unique and personalized individual. The listener becomes, therefore, a co-creator of the story as experience.
Good day everyone, I am Sonido, a BSN English student, and I am assigned to tackle the 5 elements of the story. The 5 elements of the story covers the setting, plot, characters, conflict, and theme. First, we have the characters. The characters are individuals that the story is about. The author should introduce the characters in the story with enough information that the reader can visualize each person. The character is one of the essential elements in the story that can be any person, a figure, an inanimate object. Next, we have the setting. The setting is the location of the action. An author should describe the environment or surroundings of the story in such a detail that the reader feels that he or she can picture the scene. Unusual settings such as fantasy world can be interesting, but everyday settings can help a reader to better visualize the story and feel the setting in any literature. It is the location and time frame in which the action of the narrative takes place. Next, we have the plot. Plot is the actual story around which the entire book is based. A plot should have a very clear beginning, middle, and end, with all the necessary descriptions and suspense, called exposition, so that the reader can make sense of the action and follow along from start to finish. The plot is what happens in a story. However, a plot is not a simple sequence of events. It is a strong plot that is centered on one moment, an interruption of a pattern, a turning point, or an action that raises a dramatic question which must be answered throughout the course of the story. Next, we have the conflict. Every story has a conflict to solve. The plot is centered on this conflict and the ways in which the characters attempt to resolve the problem. When the story's action becomes most exciting, right before the resolution, it is called the climax. In fiction, those problems are called conflict. More precisely, conflict means thwarted, endangered, or opposing desire. It's basically when a character wants something but something else gets in the way. Maybe the character wants a thing but can't get it. Lastly, we have the resolution. The resolution is the solution to the problem, is the way the action is resolved. For example, Katie often resolves a conflict by finding a compromise for two fighting characters or helping fix any mistake she made while stitches into someone else. It is important that the resolution fit the rest of the story in tone and creativity and solve all. The resolution is the end of the story. It occurs after the climax. It is when you learn what happens to the characters after the conflict is resolved. These essential elements keep the story running smoothly and allow the action to develop in a logical way that the reader can follow.
Choose your story medium. Here are different ways you can tell your story. Stories can take many shapes and forms. Some stories are read, some are watched, and others are listened to. Your chosen story medium depends on your type of story as well as resources like time and money. Here are different ways you can tell your story. Number 1 is a written story. Number 2, a spoken story. Number 3, an audio story. And number 4 is a digital story. Number 1, a written story. A written story is told through articles, blog posts, or books. These are mostly text and may include some images. Written stories are made by far from the most affordable, attainable method of storytelling as it just requires a free word processor like Google Docs and or pen and paper. A written story is mostly seen in post or in a website or in a newspaper or books. Number 2, a spoke story. I've seen much stories from TED, but the most catching story is the girl who left North Korea, and the story of Yeon So Lee, that she thought her country, the North Korea, was the best on the planet. Until she began to wonder at 1990s, she escaped the country North Korea at 14 years old. She began her life as hiding and refugee in China. And she faced constant danger, and even the borders is far behind from her. The third one is an audio story. An audio story is spoken aloud but recorded. That's when sets apart from the spoken story. Audio stories are usually in podcast form, and with today's technology, creating an audio story is more affordable than ever. Here are some examples of audio story. 101 Classic Short Stories in Tales podcast by John. The essence of storytelling is the story spoken to an audience. A good story is at heart a seducer. A storyteller
and audience build a unique dialogue and interaction as they participate in the creation of living art. Traditionally speaking, a storyteller has been associated with a healer, a spiritual guide, a leader, a cultural secret keeper, an entertainer, and a jester or a clown. And the storyteller can either seek to console or amuse. Digital storytelling. Storytelling always been a significant part of history, but the means through which the story have been told has evolved with each civilization. From the oral histories presented by bards in ancient courts to the works of scribes during the Renaissance to newspapers, CNN, and now the internet. Personal narrative has been used to communicate the events of the past. Digital storytelling now combines tradition with technology and allows students to tell stories through voice, text, image, audios, and videos. Digital stories allow students to take a linear series of events and turn them into multi-dimensional experience. It encourages them to communicate, collaborate, and research, as well as to infuse social media into the process. A plethora of tools and apps exist to create these projects, and all of them enable students to gain a deeper understanding of history as they explore the most effective way to retell it. Digital stories examples. Telling their stories, or examples of digital storytelling. Fractured fairy tales. Create a musical soundtrack for a scene from book. Create a comic debate using Comic Life. Create a Flappy Bird game. Create a historical scrolling timeline. Create infobids or informative videos or multimedia infographics.
While it might seem like certain people just have a natural gift for narrative techniques, much of the art of storytelling is learned through experience, education, or targeted practices, or in most cases, a mix of all three. So what are the storytelling strategies that you can easily use in your own day-to-day? So for today, we are sharing 9 of the best storytelling tips we got with actionable takeaways that anyone can use, whether you are interested in creative writing or just want to better communicate the narratives that are running through your head. The first one we have is start where the action is. Setup is very important when you are telling a story. But if you want to grab your audience attention from the get-go, you are usually better off starting in the middle instead of at the very beginning. As you go, you will be able to weave in the details that round out your characters and their experience, all while having your listeners already invested in the stakes, setting, and the outcome. Second is have a point. So the difference between a bland storytelling and a engaging storytelling is that the latter has a payoff for its listeners. While the former is interesting only to the storyteller, it is impossible to figure out how to tell a story if you are only focused on the what instead of the why. So make sure that there is a central message for your audience, even if they won't know what it is until the end. Third is edit down the details. The more you work on a story, the more you will usually end up cutting out of it. Great storytellers know that every detail isn't relevant, even those that might seem interesting at the outset. If you get too bogged down in the minutiae of your story, you will end up losing the attention of your audience. So stick to what is relevant and leave the rest on the cutting room floor. Fourth is the bring in emotion.
You can force emotion, but you can foster it. Audiences rely on the storyteller to guide them on how they should be feeling about the particular aspects of the narrative they are hearing, and they will look to everyone from your words to your facial expressions and your body language in order to figure it out. Fifth is the introduce conflict. Ask any expert on how you do storytelling, and they will likely to tell you that the key to good storytelling skills is embracing the conflict. Even if the ending that you are ultimately driving towards is a happy one, an easy and linear path to the finish line isn't going to keep your audience engaged. Instead, you want your characters to face obstacles and a decent amount of drama as they journey on their path. 6 is keep it simple. Have you ever gotten frustrated with a book or a TV show because you just can't figure out what's happening? So analyzing storytelling skills often comes down to deducing just how effective the storyteller was at conveying their narrative, even in spite of the twists and turns that keep it moving along. So regardless of the complexity of your message, the story itself should be easy to follow, and it should never leave your listeners feeling lost and confused. 7 is give your characters opinions. So in stories, as in real life, people aren't just blank slates that things happen to. They are dynamic, dramatic beings who react to the scenarios they find themselves in. So briefly but effectively, tell your audience how your characters feel about the situation they are in to give your story more substance and dimension. 8 is practice. Wondering how I can improve my storytelling skills is the answer is the practice. It might sound weird to rehearse a story in advance, especially one that you are just planning on sharing casually, but practice is a big part of establishing a good storytelling technique. Not only will it help you develop your cadence, it will also allow you to identify gaps in the narrative and take out the things that aren't working. Lastly is read, listen, watch, and learn. If you want to know how to improve storytelling skills, look no further than those who have already mastered it. Read books, essays, and listen to podcasts and watch narrative-driven films to absorb the qualities of a good storytelling and discover for yourself what an audience hook.
So that's the end of our report. Hope you understand our topic. Thank you for listening. God bless.